Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Mythic for Developers. Today, we're going to be talking about C2 profiles. So if we look over here at Mythic's UI, we see all different kinds of things that we have installed. We have different kinds of agents and translation containers and third-party services, all sorts of stuff. I'll do separate videos on each one talking about them, but today's video is going to be talking about C2 profiles. So you can easily identify C2 profiles in this list by looking for either this Wi-Fi looking icon, which means it is an egress profile. It talks out either to like a redirector or something over the internet to talk back to Mythic, or it'll have this kind of link icon. The link icon means that it is a peer-to-peer profile. It doesn't reach out to the internet directly. Instead, its purpose is to allow two different agents to connect and talk to each other. For this video, we're going to be talking about an egress C2 profile, specifically WebSocket. So if we look at the information here in the UI, there's a couple of things to call out. So you see over here, we have a offline and a C2 server status. So there's two components to C2 profiles in Mythic. There's the Docker container. So is the container itself running, connected to Mythic, synced up online? And then inside of that Docker container, you'll actually have whatever code you're using to do the C2 profile special sauce, whether that's binding to a port and accepting WebSocket connections, maybe that's reaching out to Slack or Azure or doing some sort of dead drop service or what have you. The thing that's doing that special C2 comms is here, this C2 server status piece. So if we go ahead and start looking at the code, it'll be very similar to what we were talking about in the last video for agents. So as we come over here and we look at this project layout should be very familiar to you. It's the same as everything you'll see that you install via Mythic CLI. All agents, C2 profiles, login containers, webhooks, whatever, all has the same format. Because of that, we have this same config.json. So we can see here certain files or folders we want to include or exclude. In our case, because we're looking at a C2 profile, we're going to be here in the C2 profiles folder. Just like before, this top level folder here, this entire thing is what gets copied over into the installed services directory on Mythic. So ours is called WebSocket. Inside of here, this internal structure can be whatever you want. You need to have this Docker file though, so that whenever Mythic actually creates the image and creates your Docker container, it knows how to process your specific agent or C2 profile. Like we saw with the @file agent when we're looking at agent development, we are doing things in Python here. So we have a main.py. Again, it doesn't have to be called main.py, but the key here being that this imports Mythic container and then imports the actual C2 profile. In this case, for @file is importing the actual agent and then calling the Mythic service start and run forever. So what does that actually mean for us? So if we come inside of this WebSocket folder, inside of Mythic, we have this file here. This is what we actually imported. And so we are importing from Mythic Container's C2 profile base, this C2 profile definition. So just like for agent development, what we needed to do was subclass the payload type class with our own custom one, and that's what gets synced up and used with Mythic. We're doing the same thing here. We have a C2 profile class that we then subclass, in our case called WebSocket. And then because this gets imported, it gets automatically picked up by Mythic, synced over, and then it becomes available in the UI. So there's a couple of pieces here. We have a name. This is whatever will show up in the UI. So if we look back over here at Mythic, we can see this down here, WebSocket. We have a description for the C2 profile itself. Again, that same description pops up over here, down here at the WebSocket description. We have author or authors. This is P2P indicates whether or not our C2 profile is meant for peer-to-peer communications or egress communications. Because we are doing WebSocket for egress, we'll go ahead and set is peer-to-peer false. Now, these next two things, because Mythic allows you to have whatever structure you want inside of this WebSocket directory here, Mythic still needs to know what code to actually run for that internal service status. So that's what we're specifying here. There's two pieces. There's a server folder path and a server binary path. So if we come back over here and we look at, any of these other C2 profiles. So let's go ahead and look up here at HTTP, for example. So we have the container is online and it is accepting connections. Anytime that the container is online, you'll have these buttons over here. Notice how our WebSocket container is not online, so we don't have those extra buttons. If we click this, we'll get two options. So we can view standard out, standard error if that internal server is running and we have debug logging and stuff like that going. The one that's always available is this view edit config. So you've probably seen this already a couple of times for, just using Mythic as you're trying to go about and operate. You might need to change for a C2 profile what port it's bound to, if you need to change SSL connectivity, add in configuration parameters, stuff like that. That's all in this JSON file that you're probably used to seeing. Well, that is a very specific file that Mythic is pulling. It's always config.json, and Mythic needs to know where that exists in your code. So what we do over here is we're actually specifying as part of this server folder path, this is the path to where that config.json lives. So in our case, our current directory, WebSocket C2 code, and here we have that config.json. So this will be the one that we can view with that button in the UI and edit, and anytime you edit it there, this specific file gets updated. So that's the server folder path. That's also where, if we come over here to the Mythic UI and we look at this button here, this allows you to go through and over RabbitMQ, list out the files that exist on inside the Docker container. So when you click that, these files that are showing up that you can edit, download, delete, or even upload new files is all within the context of that directory that's specified by the server folder path. That's why you'll see the config.json in there as well. So if we come back over here, this config.json and the folder is very important. You want to make sure that whatever you specify here, it doesn't necessarily have to have the binary that's running in it, but it needs to be the one that's going to have all the configuration and pieces that you want the UI and operator to be able to interact with. Now, outside of that, there is, whenever we start the internal service, Mythic has to know what thing to actually execute. So that's where this comes into play, the server binary path. So this is a path to a very specific file. It can be called whatever you want. It just needs to be executable. So if, in this case, we are using Go and compiling a Go binary, so it just needs to be a binary that's executable. You could just as easily have it be a Python script. Then you just need to make sure that the top of the Python script has the shebang, the hash exclamation point, to be able to identify as part of executing that file what program gets used. Mythic isn't doing anything special. It's not saying like Python 3, run this thing. It just passes the path to it for execution. So you have to be able to make sure that whatever it is that you're executing has the appropriate environment to be able to run. Then there's the parameters that you can specify for the C2 profile. I'll do another video that goes more in depth into these, but this is where you're specifying the various aspects that you want the user to fill out as part of building the C2 profile for an agent. There's also a bunch of other different functions that you can add in here. There's a lot you can do. I'll talk about these more in depth in a later video, but the reason I want to call out this WebSocket C2 profile is because it provides a nice split of how you can really architect things. So as you go through and you do these things like defining your WebSocket and stuff like that, you can do them either in Python or Go. But that's just kind of this metadata aspect about how to interact with RabbitMQ and sync data over to Mythic. The actual server code that's running to bind to ports, reach out to Slack or Twitter or do your special C2 comms sauce can be written in whatever language you want. Mythic doesn't care as long as it results in something that it can execute. So that's why even though we're doing all this in Python, the actual code that's going through for WebSockets is Go. And we just make sure as part of our Docker creation and all that, that we can generate a binary that then is available for us to execute. So that's this one down here. Because this is all in Go, I like to do a lot of development off on the side. So I have a makefile in here that allows me to specify things like we saw before in the previous videos for doing remote development. What is the Mythic server host? What is the port? What is the address? Stuff like that. And so you can run your server code completely separate from Mythic. Because remember, Mythic doesn't care where any of your code lives or if it's in Docker containers or any of that. It just cares that it knows where it's getting these connections from. So I'll do another video more in depth on talking about kind of how the C2 logic works inside of these extra server binaries that you can create. But I just want to call out that you can run all this separate. So we can have not even the quote unquote container running that's synced up to Mythic. But we can run this internal Mythic WebSocket binary as long as we give it all the right environment variables and have it still get agent connections and forward them off to Mythic without any issue. It really makes doing your C2 development a lot easier because you can have any IDE that you're using, spin it up, run, debug, step through, do all that sort of stuff without having to worry about making changes and pushing to, installed services and all that sort of stuff all the time. So if we go ahead and start debugging this WebSocket container, you'll see here, we'll get a lot of the same sort of stuff that we saw before for the agent, where we have a debug level. We're connecting up with a certain version for the container, certain PyPy version. It says that we're processing a C2 profile called WebSocket. It knows this because we subclassed the C2 profile and gave it a name. It tries to connect to RabbitMQ. It's successful. It syncs all of our data over. And then it starts listening via RabbitMQ for taskings from Mythic to do various things. So one of the first things that will always happen is after it starts, and a container kind of starts up, Mythic will automatically task the C2 profile to start running. So that's what we're seeing here is this output is the output of starting that Mythic WebSocket server binary. So we can always come over to the UI, hit stop, and you'll see now we got a request to stop the server. And then if I hit start again in the UI, you'll see it come through and we get our output here. If we look back at the UI as we do this, we can also see that same output appearing here for just starting the server. So you can really see this kind of end-to-end component going through. Those are the kind of main things I want to call out for just starting to get used to doing C2 development. I'll have more videos where we go more in depth into these various parameters and extra functions you can do and crazy functionality. But I really wanted to highlight here that just like with your payload, your agents, you can have this run outside of Mythic. We can do it here in an IDE. Outside of the kind of meta code that describes the C2 profile, your actual C2 profile code can be any language as well. Same sort of thing we saw with agent development, where you have that kind of meta code being in Python or Go, but the actual language of your agent can be anything that you want. So hopefully this clears up a couple of things about kind of how C2 profiles are structured. The whole goal of a C2 profile is just to get the data from an agent and forward it off to Mythic. It's not concerned about the content of the message, so like making sure it's in a certain format or making sure that it's, Mythic's JSON versus some custom protocol or any of that sort of stuff. It's not concerned about that at all. Its whole point is get a full message from the agent, give it to Mythic, get the response back, and send that back to the agent. However that kind of communication pattern exists, that's it. And the reason that we have this split out in a separate container is so that we can kind of define a C2 profile as more of a data contract. Here's how data comes in, here's how data goes out. And then any agent can say, you know what, I am actually willing to speak that contract. And so I will mark that I support the profile. And now you can start building and tying these sorts of things together. So hopefully that kind of clears a little bit of stuff up about the role of a C2 profile container in Mythic. And I'll dive more in depth into these various aspects in future videos.